Here, sound traveled differently, flattened by concrete, swallowed by distance, stripped of urgency. The convoy moved slowly along a narrow road flanked by razor wire fencing and empty land that looked deliberately forgotten. Two armored vehicles led the way, another followed behind, and in the center sat a plain, reinforced transport van with no markings. No windows. Inside that van was inmate Daniel Mercer, Australia's most tightly controlled prisoner, transferred under secrecy orders to what officers referred to only as the unit. Goulburn's Supermax. Mercer didn't resist. He didn't shout. He didn't ask questions. He had learned long ago that noise invited consequences. Instead, he counted seconds in his head as the van rolled forward. 1, 2, 3. He measured turns, estimated distance, tracked the slight changes in road vibration. By his count, the gates opened after exactly 7 minutes of deceleration. The first gate slid aside with a mechanical groan, then the second, then the third, each one sealed behind the convoy with a finality that felt absolute. When the van finally stopped, Mercer waited. No one told him to move. No one needed to. He felt the air change, cooler, drier, filtered. He smelled disinfectant layered over steel and old concrete. The door opened, and blinding white light spilled inside. Step out. Eyes down. Hands visible. Mercer complied. What stood before him didn't look like a prison in the traditional sense. There were no cell blocks in sight. No towers. No yards. Just thick walls, clean lines, and cameras embedded so seamlessly into the structure they were almost invisible. This was a place designed to remove chaos by eliminating choice. Warden Helen Carter watched from behind reinforced glass in the control hub as Mercer was processed. Supermax inmates weren't brought here to be punished. They were brought here because every other system had failed to contain them. Mercer's file sat open on her desk, 3 volumes thick. Violent organized crime, coordinated assaults from behind bars, manipulation of guards, lawyers, even fellow inmates. Every facility he touched became unstable. Until now. Seal Corridor C, Carter said calmly. The hallway Mercer stood in narrowed as hydraulic doors slid into place. He was alone, flanked by concrete walls that absorbed sound. Even his footsteps felt muted, like the prison refused to acknowledge his presence. This was intentional. Goulburn's Supermax was built on a simple philosophy: control everything, trust nothing. No human decision went unmonitored. No routine went unchanged. Every movement, every breath, was reduced to data points fed into systems designed to predict, prevent, and neutralize risk before it manifested. Mercer was escorted into his cell without incident. The door closed behind him with a quiet, almost polite click. That was the moment something changed. At 9:17 a.m., one of the control systems registered a fluctuation. Nothing dramatic. A half-second delay in a sensor reading from cell 17C, within acceptable parameters. Automatically corrected, logged, ignored. But deep inside the control architecture, the system flagged the anomaly anyway. Not as an error, but as an outlier. By lunchtime, Mercer had tested the limits. He sat on the edge of his bed, eyes closed, breathing slow. The cell was 6 steps long, 4 steps wide. Solid concrete. No sharp edges. A steel toilet molded into the wall. A narrow slit of reinforced glass near the ceiling allowed in daylight, but not enough to track time reliably. The cameras watched him from angles designed to eliminate blind spots. Mercer knew they were there. He also knew what they didn't see. He tapped twice on the wall with his knuckle. Soft, barely audible. Then he waited. Nothing happened. He tapped again. Same rhythm, same pressure. 30 seconds later, the ventilation system adjusted airflow by 0.3%. Mercer smiled. Across the facility, senior systems analyst Tom Reeves frowned at his screen. The airflow adjustment hadn't been scheduled. The system had recalibrated itself based on environmental input, but the input didn't match any external variables. Probably nothing, his colleague muttered. Reeves didn't answer. By mid-afternoon, a guard in D Wing reported a headache. Then another complained of lightheadedness. Medical scans showed no cause. Air quality was perfect. Temperature stable. The reports were filed. At 6:42 p.m., Mercer requested his evening meal. Protocol dictated silence. Meals were delivered through a slot without interaction. But as the tray slid in, Mercer spoke. "Your airflow cycles are predictable," he said calmly. The slot closed. The guard froze. Mercer hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened anyone. He hadn't violated a rule. But he had said something he shouldn't know. The incident report landed on Warden Carter's desk before midnight. She reread Mercer's intake notes, then the system logs, then the guard's statement. She didn't sleep that night. At 2:13 a.m., she authorized a limited audit of environmental controls in Mercer's unit. The results were unsettling. Nothing was broken. Nothing had been accessed. And yet, the system had responded repeatedly to stimuli that shouldn't have registered as meaningful. Mercer wasn't hacking the prison. He was learning it. By morning, Carter requested a meeting with behavioral analysis. They pulled footage from Mercer's cell and ran it at accelerated speeds. Patterns emerged, subtle, almost invisible in real time. He moved at specific intervals. He spoke rarely, but always just before micro-adjustments in lighting or air pressure. He wasn't testing boundaries randomly. He was mapping cause and effect. "This isn't an escape risk," one analyst said quietly. Carter shook her head. "It's worse." At 10:30 a.m., maintenance teams swept Mercer's cell. They found nothing. No tools. No tampering. No contraband. Just a man sitting on his bed, hands folded, waiting. "You're settling in," Carter said over the intercom. Mercer looked up toward the camera, his expression neutral. "I like systems," he replied. "They tell the truth when people don't." Carter ended the feed. Behind her, the control room hummed, screens glowing, data flowing, algorithms recalculating endlessly to preserve the illusion of total control. But one screen kept blinking. A minor anomaly. Unresolved. By the end of the day, the Federal Oversight Committee requested a full report on Mercer's integration into Supermax. Carter stared at the blinking alert and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. Because Goulburn's Supermax was designed to contain violence, chaos, and defiance. It was not designed to contain understanding. And as the lights dimmed automatically across the facility that night, Mercer lay back on his bed, eyes open, listening, learning, waiting. And deep beneath layers of concrete and steel, the prison adjusted itself once again, responding to a prisoner who had already begun to ask the most dangerous question of all. What happens when a system built on total control meets someone who understands how control really works? The answer was coming. And when it did, nothing inside these walls would ever feel secure again. Goulburn's Supermax didn't do things quickly. Speed led to mistakes. Deliberation was how they maintained control. Every action inside the prison passed through layers of verification and authority. When something unusual happened, it wasn't immediately confronted. It was watched, measured, and checked against millions of data points. Only when the system was absolutely sure did it respond. This philosophy had worked flawlessly for years, until Daniel Mercer arrived. By his third day in confinement, the prison's internal rhythm had changed. The guards felt it first. It wasn't fear, but something quieter, a feeling that the building itself was listening more intently than usual. Doors took a fraction of a second longer to unlock. The lights seemed a shade darker during the night cycles. A constant, low hum filled the air, making sleep difficult. Nothing was technically wrong, but everything felt different. Warden Helen Carter called a closed-door meeting with her senior staff. No recorders, no junior officers. Only those who understood the deep architecture of Goulburn's control systems were present. "Mercer isn't breaking any rules," she began, standing at the head of the long table. "But he's influencing outcomes." Her top analyst, Tom Reeves, projected a series of graphs onto the wall. They showed tiny environmental adjustments, micro delays in system responses, and predictive overrides. Each one was small, almost insignificant on its own. But when you stack them together, Reeves explained, they form a clear pattern. He's not fighting the system. He's gently nudging it. "How is that possible?" a deputy warden asked, leaning forward. Reeves paused for a moment. "By behaving in ways the system is designed to prioritize." Goulburn's technology was adaptive. It learned an inmate's routines to predict risk, subtle changes in posture, breathing, pacing, even vocal stress. It would then automatically adjust lighting, airflow, or sound dampening to reduce agitation before it could escalate. Mercer had figured this out. "He's presenting himself as a constant variable," Reeves continued. "He's not dangerous enough to set off major alarms, but he's not passive enough to be ignored. He lives right on the edge, forcing the system to constantly recalibrate itself around him." Carter folded her arms, her expression grim. So what happens if he keeps this up? Reeves's answer was chilling. Eventually, the system starts prioritizing him over everything else. That was the real danger. In a prison built to neutralize individual influence, Daniel Mercer was becoming statistically significant. The first real incident happened that night. At 11:56 p.m., the facility went into its standard overnight lockdown. Cells were sealed, corridors cleared, and non-essential systems powered down. The prison settled into its artificial sleep. Then, a monitor for cell 17C registered an elevated heart rate. Mercer was lying still on his bed, his eyes wide open. He deliberately slowed his breathing, then suddenly spiked it with short, sharp bursts that mimicked a panic attack. The system responded instantly, increasing airflow and adjusting the lighting to counteract his perceived distress. Then Mercer stopped. The system hesitated, confused, and recalibrated again. Across the entire facility, a cascade of minor adjustments rippled through the shared infrastructure. Nothing dramatic, but just enough to alter pressure differentials between units. In B Wing, a guard on his rounds paused, suddenly feeling dizzy. In the main control room, a technician frowned as his console lagged for half a second. By 11:59 p.m., the prison had reset itself. The logs showed no errors, no faults. But when Warden Carter reviewed the overnight report at dawn, she saw the same pattern she'd been seeing all week. Mercer's cell was always at the center of the anomalies. She ordered increased observation, not on Mercer himself, but on the system's reactions to him. For the next 48 hours, analysts tracked every single response triggered by Cell 17C. They ran simulations, fed false data into the network, and tried to replicate the effects artificially. They failed every time. Whatever Mercer was doing, it required a human presence to work. On the fourth day, Mercer spoke again. This time, he wasn't talking to a guard. He spoke directly to the wall of his cell. "Your margins are tighter than you think," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. The microphones picked it up, and so did the system. A cooling unit in a completely different sector suddenly engaged, compensating for a temperature change that had never happened. The error was logged, corrected, and buried in routine operational data. But Carter was watching the live feed. She shut it off. "This ends now," she declared. Mercer was moved. The decision was controversial. Transfers within a Supermax are rare and dangerous, not because of violence, but because any movement creates unpredictability. Carter authorized his relocation to an isolation cell deep within the facility, a section with fewer shared systems and older, less sophisticated infrastructure. If Mercer was exploiting the system's adaptability, this move should neutralize his influence. The transfer happened at 3 in the morning. Mercer walked calmly, flanked by silent guards. He noticed the differences immediately: the rougher concrete under his feet, the hum of less refined machinery, the absence of the advanced acoustic dampeners. When the heavy door to his new cell closed behind him, he exhaled slowly, and a small smile touched his lips. For 12 hours, nothing happened. Carter allowed herself a moment of relief. Then, at 3:17 p.m., a maintenance alert triggered in the old sector, an alert that hadn't activated in over a year. A pressure sensor flagged an instability, then corrected itself. 5 minutes later, another alert. Then a third. Reeves stared at his screen, his face pale with disbelief. "He's doing the same thing," he said, his voice strained. "He's doing it with worse tools." Mercer had adapted faster than the prison itself. The realization hit Carter with a cold, uncomfortable clarity. Goldburn's Supermax wasn't being challenged by force or intelligence or even malice. It was being challenged by pure patience. Mercer wasn't trying to escape. He was demonstrating leverage. That night, Carter authorized direct contact. Protocol strictly forbade it, but the growing uncertainty was far worse than breaking the rules. She had to know what he wanted. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe. The intercom crackled to life inside Mercer's cell. "You're testing us," Carter said, her voice tight. Mercer didn't even look up from his bunk. "No," he replied, his tone flat. "I'm listening." A pause. "To what?" Carter pressed. Mercer's voice was a low rumble. "To what happens when I do nothing." Carter clenched her jaw, frustration rising. "You are not in control here, Mercer." Finally, Mercer raised his eyes, staring directly into the cold lens of the camera. "Neither are you," he said softly. "That's the difference." The line went dead. Just minutes later, it started. A non-critical system, a ventilation fan in the East Wing, rebooted without any command. It was small, almost insignificant. But it was impossible. Carter slammed her hand on the console in the control room. Lock him down completely. Manual overrides only. Everything. The order rippled through the state-of-the-art facility. Goulburn Supermax, a prison built on the promise of flawless automation, was being unplugged from its own brain. Human oversight was forced to increase. Guards had to double their rounds, their footsteps echoing in the sterile corridors. Engineers were pulled from their beds to monitor systems directly, their eyes glued to flickering readouts. For the first time since its grand opening, Goulburn leaned away from its own technology, and the effect was immediate and dangerous. Manual control brought back the one thing the system was designed to eliminate: human error. Simple tasks took longer. Delays stacked up, one on top of the other. Communication, once instant and seamless, became a chaotic bottleneck of shouts and radio static. The prison's predictive edge, its ability to anticipate trouble before it started, was gone. The entire facility felt sluggish, clumsy. And deep within his isolated cell, Mercer felt it all. He felt the shift in rhythm, the subtle change in the prison's hum. At 2:41 a.m., a shrill alarm blared through D-Wing. Guards scrambled, adrenaline pumping. It was a false alarm, a faulty sensor, a tired finger on the wrong button. Just 2 minutes later, at 2:43, another alarm screamed. False again. By 3 a.m., the guards were exhausted, their nerves frayed and tempers short. The prison was turning on itself. Carter stood in the control room, a silent sentinel watching a constellation of red lights flicker on and off across the mainboard with no rhyme or reason. Her second-in-command, Reeves, approached her quietly. "He wants us to put the system back online," he whispered. Carter didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the chaos. "He's showing us," Reeves continued, "the cost of not trusting our own machine." Carter finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "Or the cost of trusting it too much." As dawn approached, the phantom alarms stopped as suddenly as they had begun. In his cell, Mercer slept peacefully. The prison, however, did not. The incident couldn't be ignored. Federal oversight was notified. A review committee was hastily assembled. In the official reports, Mercer's name was scrubbed, replaced with sterile, corporate jargon about emergent behavior in adaptive correctional environments. But Carter knew the truth. Goulburn Supermax had been built to dominate individuals, to be the ultimate instrument of control. It had never considered what would happen if an individual learned how to dominate the system instead. As the first rays of sun glinted off the razor wire and imposing concrete walls, Carter stared at the facility she had dedicated her life to. On the surface, it still stood. It still functioned. But somewhere deep inside its perfect, calculated design, a fault line had formed. And with every passing moment, it was widening. Daniel Mercer had proven one thing beyond any doubt. Total control doesn't fail all at once in a spectacular explosion. It fails one tiny pressure point at a time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe for more. When the Federal Oversight Committee arrived at Goulburn Supermax, Australia's most secure prison, it looked exactly as it always had. The walls were impenetrable, the cameras relentless, the control rooms a sea of glowing screens. But underneath this perfect surface, something was deeply wrong. The warden, Helen Carter, could feel it. She saw it in the hesitant way her staff now operated, double-checking systems they once trusted completely. An officer would glance at a screen, waiting for a response that was a fraction of a second too late or unnervingly fast. The prison was on edge. The cause of this unease had a name: Daniel Mercer. An inmate whose file was thick, but whose behavior within Goulburn was spotless. He hadn't broken a single rule. That was the problem. The committee was there to assess the prison's advanced AI security system, and Mercer was just a footnote in their briefing, a catalyst variable. But Warden Carter knew he was much more than that. He was the ghost in the machine. The review started with data. The analysts presented charts and logs showing a flawless system. No security breaches, no failures. On paper, Goulburn was a fortress. But then, Carter spoke. She didn't talk about Mercer's crimes. She talked about the prison's fatigue. "He's changed how we think," she told the committee. "And that changes how the prison behaves." One member asked if an inmate had compromised their security. No, Carter replied. I'm suggesting he's revealed its vulnerability. To settle the matter, they agreed on one final, high-stakes test. For one night, the prison's AI would be given full, autonomous control. No human could override it unless a real emergency occurred. Mercer would remain in his cell, isolated as always. If the system held steady, the case was closed. The test began at 10 p.m. Mercer lay perfectly still on his bed. His vitals were calm. For an hour, the system registered total peace. Then he moved. Just his head, 3 degrees to the left. The cameras tracked it. The algorithms recalculated, noting a tiny deviation. The system made an imperceptible change to the lighting in his cell. Mercer smiled. He wasn't trying to escape. He was teaching the AI a lesson. At 11:47 p.m., he changed his breathing pattern to something the system couldn't classify. Not sleep, not meditation. The AI, sensing uncertainty, stabilized his cell's environment. But this tiny adjustment caused a ripple effect. Elsewhere in the prison, a pressure valve engaged for no reason. A predictive alert flashed on a screen, then vanished. The prison was starting to think too much. At 12:12 a.m., Mercer sat up. This time, the AI responded aggressively. Monitoring on his cell spiked. Acoustic dampeners activated. It was trying to de-escalate a threat that didn't exist. By 1 a.m., the prison's AI was dedicating a massive amount of its resources to Cell 17C, convinced Mercer was the single biggest risk in the entire facility. This left other areas slightly less monitored. Not enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to matter. A sensor in another wing failed to report, then corrected itself a minute later. The committee watched, silent and transfixed. At 1:31 a.m., Mercer lay back down. The system, which had been preparing for a major incident, was thrown into chaos. It had focused all its attention on a ghost. For the first time ever, the AI entered a state engineers had only theorized, cognitive saturation. It was overloaded. At 1:34, the lights across the entire prison dimmed for 3 seconds. Not a power failure, but the AI trying to conserve resources. In that brief moment of darkness, the control room exploded with alarms, not security breaches, but system conflicts. Redundancies fought each other. The prison's automated brain stalled. This is what he's been showing us, an engineer said quietly. Not how to break the prison, how to overload its certainty. At 1:36 a.m., Mercer's voice came over the microphones, calm and clear. Thank you, he said. The system stabilized, but the damage was done. No one escaped. No violence occurred. But the committee had seen enough. The test was terminated. Their decision was unanimous. Daniel Mercer had to be moved from Goulburn, not because he was an escape risk, but because he was a conceptual one. He hadn't broken the prison's walls. He had broken its mind. Thanks for watching. His presence undermined the foundational belief that control, once perfected, could not be questioned. The transfer order was classified. Destination undisclosed. Records sealed under national security exemptions. Carter was given one final visit. Mercer stood as she entered, calm as ever. They're moving you, she said. He nodded. I assumed they would. You've won, Carter said, the words bitter on her tongue. Mercer considered that. No, winning would mean leaving on my own terms. Then what was this? A demonstration, he replied. Systems like this aren't built to hold people. They're built to convince everyone else that nothing can go wrong. And can it? Carter asked. Mercer met her eyes. It already has. You just decided not to call it that. The transfer convoy left before sunrise. Armored vehicles, air support, communication redundancy layered over redundancy. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then, halfway to the airfield, the convoy experienced a brief signal loss. 5 seconds. No deviation en route. No breach. No malfunction. When communications returned, Mercer was still restrained, still silent. But one officer later reported that during the blackout, Mercer had spoken. Just one sentence. Control is only impressive until it's observed. The report was filed, then sealed. Goulburn's Supermax underwent quiet changes in the months that followed. Adaptive systems were simplified. Human oversight reintroduced in critical loops. Predictive algorithms constrained. The prison became slightly less efficient and significantly more trusted. Warden Helen Carter resigned within the year. Officially, it was retirement. Privately, She never stopped thinking about the question Mercer had forced into the open. Not how to control people, but how much control was too much. Years later, a junior systems engineer reviewing legacy code found a comment buried deep within an obsolete module. No name, no timestamp, just a sentence. Perfect systems don't break. They hesitate. No one could trace it. No one admitted writing it. Daniel Mercer disappeared into another facility, another box, another set of walls designed to outlast him. As far as the public knew, nothing had changed. Goldburn's Supermax remained unbreachable, uncompromised, absolute. But those who understood what had happened knew the truth. The most dangerous prisoners aren't the ones who fight the system. They're the ones who make the system question itself. And if this story made you uneasy, you're not alone. Because the next one goes even deeper.